thing I do want to say before we get started, since we're recording these talks and putting them up on the website, one of the things we'd like to do is not have questions during the talk, so that we can kind of have a better flow for the video, and then reserve Q&A for the end of the talk. So without further ado, please welcome David Merrill.
Thanks. So I'm going to talk about Sifteo and what we're building, but I'm also going to go through how it came to be, because this new game system that my company has built and is bringing to the world in a variety of ways came out of my PhD research at the MIT Media Lab. So it's a story of spinning out a company as well as what this new game system is. Here's a little preview of what the interaction looks like, just to kind of whet your appetite. I'll show you much more in a minute. But I thought I would start with some context. So Sifteo started out as research, and started out not specifically as a game system, but as a user interface idea and a human-computer interaction research project. And this is a little bit of like the philosophical background of where this idea came from. So this is a popular vision for the future of human-computer interaction. This picture comes from a Microsoft concept video that was called Productivity Future Vision. And the idea is that our smartphones become the interface for everything we do. And I'll call this like, this is the platonic ideal of the smartphone. It's a glass slab. All it is screen, glass, wireless connectivity, that's it. And so the notion that this is like the perfect device is actually very powerful. Having a little slice of the internet in your pocket is awesome. But what's happening is there used to be all these other devices that we used to use for things. Like, this is a guitar tuner. I don't use one of these anymore because an app on my phone does this. And when was the last time you used one of these? Or one of these? Or language translator? Or dedicated music player? Compass? Bunch of other stuff that is now gone. Even cowbells. There's an app for that. So the thing that was behind the creation of Sifteo, and what I want to persuade you about today, is that I think that the perfect glass slab in everybody's pocket doesn't actually eliminate the need for other devices, but what it does do is it pushes the design of other devices and other interactions into, I think, more exciting spaces. So think about this. Woodworkers have different tools for different jobs. There is the very mature craft, and if you look at each of these tools, there's a business end, there's like the part that carves wood, and then there's the human end that fits your hand. And I think there's an important lesson here, which is that the kind of tools we build need to fit us, need to fit our bodies, our perceptions, the way we reason, and the way we, like the ergonomics of our hands and how we interact with the world. And that's really important. So I stole this picture from a rant online that I highly recommend checking out if you haven't seen it already. It's called A Brief Rant on the Future of Interaction Design by Brett Victor. And the point is, our hands are really good at doing all kinds of different things, grasping objects in different ways depending on the texture, the material, the size, the heft. Like, there's so much intelligence embodied in the way we interact physically with objects with our hands that the glass slab doesn't take advantage of. So Mark Andreessen, the inventor of the browser, put it well a couple years ago when he said software is eating the world. And he was talking about software-powered companies, but it's kind of the same idea when you think about software-powered products like smartphones with apps on them. And when he was talking about companies, his point was that companies that are doing interesting new things that are enabled uniquely by software are going to just run the old dinosaur companies that are doing things the old way out of business. And what I think this means for me personally, I think that's true, by the way, that software getting embedded into objects can totally renew them in interesting ways. Like in the game industry, right, we used to have well, in play, let me be more broad. In play, we used to have toys. Before software was deployed into people's lives, we had wooden toys. We had companies like Hasbro making action figures, jacks, dice, dominoes, things like that. And then in the late 70s, with the arrival of the Atari 2600, Commodore 64, all of a sudden software got deployed into people's homes and living rooms, and it totally changed the way we play with interactivity. And the thing is, those early play experiences didn't bear much resemblance physically in terms of the act itself, didn't bear much resemblance to our classic traditional ways of play, right? If you're sitting in front of your TV with the joystick in 1978, like that's very different than building something with blocks or playing a board game with friends. And I think where video games kind of started to reconnect with our physical world experiences was probably Guitar Hero. Because all of a sudden, a controller came on the scene that looked exactly like an interface that we already knew from our real world pre-software, pre-electronics. And then the Wii, should I pause?
No, it's just someone turned off the lights on you. I don't know why.
Okay.
But yes, go ahead, project, enjoy the lights.
Great.
Don't let me pause you any further.
Yes. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay in the back, by the way? Yeah?
A little hard, if you could speak up.
Speak up.
Speak up? All right, I'll try to speak up. So the next thing after Guitar Hero's guitar controller that I think was really interesting was the Wii. A game system that came out showing people that you can play video games using the gestures that you know from real life, like swinging a tennis racket. And the thing that enabled each of these things was software taking a new form or a new enabling technology. So software in the form of cartridges enabled the Atari. Software that powered little, well in this case sensors like accelerometers, powered the Wii. And the fact that 10 years ago those accelerometers were $5 each, and then now they're less than 50 cents each, made it a practical solution for building a new control interface. And so what Sifteo is doing is taking this trend that new ways to deploy software enable new play experiences and pushing it even further. So what we're doing is what I call smart hardware, which is devices that can sense reality, that can sense how you're interacting with them and sense what's happening to them in the world. So the upshot of this quote for me, by the way, from Mark Andreessen, is that I think as a technologist, for me as a designer, I feel there's an obligation to design the kind of experiences that I want, and I want them to be more physical. So as we went about thinking about building this system into a product, we thought, well, what kind of devices make sense today? And in this era of the glass slab, where there is a smartphone in every pocket, and there's a couple possible answers. One, none. Samsung, Apple, you guys are giving us all the interface we need. Thank you very much. You did it. I don't think that's true. So as an alternative, I would say uniquely physical interactive objects are the kinds of devices that make sense, that I'm excited about building. So a few categories that I think are really interesting right now. One are devices that interface to legacy infrastructure, whether that infrastructure is credit cards or your TV or your doorknob, the deadbolt, the heating and cooling system in your house. There's a lot of legacy infrastructure out there that new smart hardware can put online and give a better interface to. Two, devices that manipulate matter. So MakerBot, designing objects out of squeezed hot plastic, or this is a smart coffee machine that I just ran into in the past 6 or 9 months, where it pulls recipes from the internet and brews the perfect cup of coffee based on a community of people sharing their data about how they brewed the perfect cup of coffee, to things like little cute smart robots where your phone becomes the brain and the face of the robot itself. So these are things manipulating matter or actuation, moving around, that phones aren't currently doing. And then finally, probably most germane to this class, interfacing us, our bodies, the way our perceptual systems work, our eyes, our hands, ergonomics of what we can grasp easily and interact with. The interface to us, humans, hasn't changed in a long time. Like, technology is changing really rapidly right now. We're not. So I think what that means is our interfaces are getting better and better. They are becoming a better and better fit to the ways our capabilities work, but there's still a lot of things we can do here. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all device. Touchscreens are awesome. They open up a lot of new possibilities, especially for play and games. But I think there's also this huge opportunity for devices and game interfaces that have unique physical capabilities. A little bit of context. Does anybody know this name, Mark Weiser? Anybody come across him? Michael, one person. Okay, good. Well, that means that I'm glad I put the slide in. So Mark Weiser was a chief scientist at Xerox PARC, which is a large research lab attached to Xerox that's still going. And in 1991, he wrote this article for Scientific American. And his big idea was that in the future we're going to be surrounded by a lot of little computers doing useful things for us all the time. And in order for this future not to totally suck, we need to be able to interact with these machines in very natural human ways. Otherwise that's going to drive us crazy. So we need to be able to interact by voice and gesture and touch, not by typing things and pressing buttons. Basically, interactions that we're already good at are going to be really important. So one of the specific things that Weiser predicted in this paper that he wrote for Scientific American more than 20 years ago was that in the future we'd be in this world of interactions that had different scales that roughly mapped onto different ways we use our body. So the biggest scale interactions he called boards, and those are basically large wall-sized interactions like today the Kinect or the CNN weather wall or any like other large touchscreen you might come across or large gesture interface. The middle category he called pads, which were tablets about yay big that you'd interact with by touch. Kind of sounds familiar, right? Keep in mind, more than 20 years ago, we have these today also. And then finally, tabs, which he described as little inch-scale computers. And the scenario that Weiser forecasted for these would basically be that they were kind of like little thumb drives. Like you'd have a bunch of them on your desk, and if I'm working on a document on my desk, I could take it, shrink it down to one of these little tabs, bring it over to your desk, and then we could pop it up on your screen and we'd work on it together there. So they're basically little containers for information. And so that was inspiring to us as a kind of vision statement, but we thought, you know, there's actually a lot more interesting things you could do with inch-scale computers. So Sifteo cubes, this is what they look like, are basically tabs. They're inch-scale computers for manipulation. They're a game interface that's inspired by everyday objects, in our case, blocks. So that's why the title of my talk is that we're enchanting everyday objects with the magic of interactivity. And I think the everyday objectness of them isn't literal, like there was not a specific object that had this exact shape back in the days before electronics, but the idea of little things that you manipulate with your hands was what went into this idea. So here's a couple of the interactions that we're building. Just
there's an insane amount of
to give you a sample.
inside to make them work. But on the outside, they're radically simple. You can download new games for your cubes digitally. Let's take a look at what you can do. Sifteo cubes can be containers for other objects. Slide the letter tiles to make words. Or they can hold particles that flow from cube to cube. They can be windows into another world. They understand what your hands can do, like pouring a liquid, or twisting a key in a lock to open a chest. Or flicks, nudges, and collisions. Or even making lunch. Sifteo cubes live in our world, so you can spin them like a top. And use all kinds of real-world stuff in creative ways. Cubes are smart. You can play with other people and full-body gestures.
And here's a video that a dad sent us of his daughters playing with Sifteo cubes that I love. So you can see them in action.
What do you think?
They're too absorbed to even answer.
Hey, name catchers. I think you can build it. Hey, do you have any message for the people who make the game? Do you have any message?
To me, that's the reason to do anything. Like, I want to make that happen in like every living room across the world, basically. So this is a little of the play background. So like I said, we started with this idea of an inch scale interface. Let's redefine interaction with digital media by building a tangible container for data that you could manipulate with your hands. And then we focused it, we narrowed it. So this is how we play. When we were kids, this is how we play with stuff. Basically things like Legos and dominoes and marbles. Like our earliest games as humans were physical ones like dominoes and Mancala, right? And it's also how we learn. You know, there's Montessori and other hands-on learning methodologies that are recognizing this importance of hands and brain working together in development. So this hands-on interaction with real stuff is a really deep part of our psychology. And then fast forward to modern day video games. They're awesome because they're so immersive and so motivating. But what we thought was, well, wouldn't it be cool to bring these two experiences together? What if the lines got blurred between video games and Legos, basically? What would that world look like? And so that's how we think of Sifteo cubes today. They're classic play experiences, but made interactive. So it's like, you can think of it like a Nintendo Wii for your coffee table that you can stick in your backpack and take anywhere. So since this came out of research when I was a grad student, I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about how this came about, because it's now a few, 4 or 5 years later, and it's gone way beyond the research. So as a company, Sifteo is about 4 years old, and this is a timeline that goes through the launch of our first generation product, which was in like September of 2011, and then I'll catch you up from there. So like I said, we started out as research at the Media Lab at MIT. This picture really sums up the original idea, which was, what if we could take the kinds of digital items that we have on our computers and manipulate there with these indirect interfaces like a mouse and keyboard, and give the individual media items, whether they're digital photos or emails or files on my desktop, give them a physical embodiment so that you could move them around and arrange them the same way you jam your hands into a pile of Legos. Like, it was really this what-if kind of idea that kicked it all off. What if we could do this? What would that look like? And so we got obsessed to explore this kind of interaction and explore this kind of play. There's this great quote that I love by Walt Disney, who said, "The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing." And I also heard an off-the-record quote from Shigeru Miyamoto, who said, "Games are not designed on paper." So we really needed to build this thing to understand what to do with it and understand if it was going to be any good. And so we started prototyping. We thought, okay, well, let's make little tablets that have screens on top that are aware of how they're being moved and how they're being handled, and take it from there, basically. And so here's the very first moment when we realized that this was officially fun. There's this super simple little demo we did. But we realized that there was something kind of magical going on with these little cute personal objects with faces on them that reacted to each other. There was something more than just like what you could do with pieces from a board game. So this goes on for a while. At this meetup, something really interesting happened. There was a young girl, probably 6 years old, who had come with her mom, named Holly. And Holly started playing Rajiv's sentence-making application. And at first, her mom was collaborating with her, giving her ideas. Why don't you try this? What about that? But at a certain moment, it just clicked. And Holly got it. And she started making those sentences really fast and ripped through all the sentences that were in there. So we have Holly having fun making sentences. We have her mom really pleased that Holly had this activity that challenged her, but then she had success. And Rajiv delighted that Holly was there trying his application and having this fun experience. That was my double aha moment. It's really different than any other system that you've probably ever designed for, with a small screen, no pointing device, and multiple cubes work together. So the standard set is 3, but it goes all the way up to 12. And there are other new platforms, new-ish, as of the last 5 years or so, that are out there. And I think, for me, one of the things that's exciting is these new UI paradigms, these new interfaces that do take the form of more natural interfaces, more natural interactions that are related to our real-world experience. These are the ones that are catching on. So to design games with these changing systems, you can't use the same design patterns. So to design, one old approach is start with game genres. A lot of them don't fit on Sifteo cubes, but some of them do. So if we step back from this a minute, games are basically a sweet spot between what the technology, what the platform can do, and then what makes sense to players. And so another approach, rather than starting from genres, is to look for sweet spots, basically, between what the technology can do, what players find engaging and fun. So for Sifteo, what does this mean? Well, the technology is a small screen. So compared to a computer or a tablet or a phone, you have much less real estate on each cube. You don't have space to put any of the little window dressing things like scores or what level you're on or other UI. You basically need to use the entire screen only for game graphics. No background art at all in some cases, although you can do that. So less area, but what you get is that it is more personal. You've got this object that a person is holding in their hand, right? There's like a history of little precious electronic objects, like the Tamagotchi when that was happening, that really feel special because of the intimacy of the size of it. So really large, simple graphics work well. Like when we think about design, like one of the ways of thinking about how to use a cube screen is think of it like it is a Scrabble tile or a domino, like a single symbol that's glanceable, so that rather than looking at the screen and trying to understand it as like a window into a world, you think about it as like this takes the form of some game piece that you can just understand immediately. That can be powerful. Next, gesture. Like I said, 3-axis accelerometer is inside each cube. So like the original Wiimote, you've got shaking, tilting, more freeform gestures. We're building out some tools now to do to help developers make more than just simple kind of shaking, tilting gestures, to do more three-dimensional spatial gestures. And then neighbor detection, we call the way that the cubes sense each other neighboring. That is one of the magic things that we've been doing for a long time, but just to have these objects recognize when they get next to each other and where they are with respect to each other is a really cool mechanic to design for. So we've developed this very simple gesture vocabulary. And the last thing is that you're working with multiple devices, which is totally new. And so a couple different ways to think about design for groups of tiles is one, you could have cubes playing the same role as each other. Like in this is a game called Code Cracker, which is a number puzzle. Each cube is showing a number. They all are functionally identical, and you're trying to arrange them in the right way using arithmetic to form a target number. Or you can get cubes to play different roles and show different symbols or tools or things like that. We designed for 3 because that's the standard set that is part of the product. And the games expand if you have more than 3. So that's also kind of a cool design challenge. If you think about making a game where the game doesn't know when you're designing it if you're going to have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or anywhere up to 12 cubes. So the games that we make expand in ways that are appropriate to the game. So in this case, this is a game that we made called Sandwich Kingdom that's kind of inspired by the original Legend of Zelda. And you're exploring these big worlds, room by room, cube by cube. And so if you have more cubes, you get a bigger window into the world that you can see simultaneously. So what about players? Well, what are we paying attention to at Sifteo? Well, the key thing is hands-on interaction with objects. That's what makes card games and board games and other kind of tabletop games really special, and what other video game systems don't do in the same way. But also group play with multiple objects, that becomes a lot easier. And so some sweet spots. Well, first, some things that do not translate. This would be a horrible game on Sifteo cubes. Like, there's no pointing interface. They're so small. You don't want to do this. First-person shooters would also not work very well, although I do secretly hope that somebody ports Doom to the system, just for tradition's sake. But genres that do work really well, word games. Like I said, I was inspired by Scrabble, where you either put one letter on each cube or multiple letters on each cube. Symbols on cubes works really well. Or adventure games, right? I mentioned Zelda. We've done a couple games that have this core mechanic of exploring a space based on putting the cube down to kind of act as windows onto a larger map. And then some classic genres like game shows can get reborn when you have a collection of controllers. We've also seen some pretty interesting, like, new hybrid genres of games. So Miami Heist was a game made by some Carnegie Mellon students. It was part board game, part electronic game, and it was super cool. It did use both as part of the game. So you set up this configuration of the physical pieces on the board, and then the cubes would go down and act out the interactive part. And then we've seen also design groups and researchers doing cool stuff, blending this tactile interaction with systems like Microsoft Surface to do kind of part large touch, part tangible interactions. So a little bit about the system itself, to whet your appetite in case you're interested to try developing on it. The graphics are 16-bit. There's 2 layers of tiled bitmaps that you have to work with that can slide around the screen and be placed wherever you want them. And then there's those have transparency, and then there's a layer of sprites that you can put down on the screen, kind of in between the 2 tiled layers. There's a callback-based event system, so when things happen to the cubes, like a cube gets shaken, or gets neighbored to another cube, or tilted, or pressed, there's a touch. Each screen is also a capacitive touch button. So whenever any of those events come in, they get coalesced and then pushed up to the game logic. So say cube A gets next to cube B. What happens under the hood is cube A sends a message back to the base. Cube B also sends a message back to the base. The thin operating system on the base coalesces those 2 events and then pushes it up to the game engine to say A is next to B. And then your game can decide what that means to it. Like I said, 3 to 12 cubes work together in this system, and you may have disconnect. So if someone takes a cube and runs outside with it, it's going to get out of range and eventually drop off, and then it might come back. So you have this kind of like harsh environment for the game where you might actually have a varying number of cubes throughout the game. And so there's some best practices that our team has figured out to help developers like reassign what's happening on a cube if all of a sudden it goes out of range or the battery runs out or things like that. And then finally, just wrapping your head around how to use the orientations of the cubes is also interesting. It's a design challenge because there really is no up or down on these things. You could rotate them, to each of the positions and use it that way. So some games use that capability, some games don't. For anyone who likes hardware, I'll say just one or two things about it. The hardware is really awesome. It's really cutting edge. A couple of things I think are my favorite are the way that the cubes sense each other is inductor based. So these are inductors. They're basically wound coils. They generate a little field that's pulsing with a unique pattern on each side of each cube that's currently in play. And then when you put them next to each other, that field makes its way over into the neighboring cube and generates a little signal over there, which gets turned into data about which cube that is. So it means that we don't have to put any holes in the side of the cubes or anything. It's kind of like, it's sort of like NFC that phones are starting to do, but it's much closer range because we needed it to literally detect within a couple millimeters and then know that they're apart once they're a little further. The other thing is that we've got this awesome, kind of retro, but awesome 2D graphics engine on this little microcontroller that's in here that's actually part of the radio. So if you're interested in like the architecture itself and how it came about, there's a great article that Beth Scott wrote, who's the chief architect of this system. It's on Adafruit, and it's called How We Built a Super Nintendo from Wireless Keyboard. And the reason she called it that was that the little radio chip that's in these cubes was intended to drive much simpler things like wireless keyboards, but she just packed all this behavior from radio functionality to sensing to graphics engine onto that little microcontroller. And then the base itself is a little kind of thin virtual machine that runs these apps in a way that is both right on the processor, so they get full access to the performance of this thing, but it's sandboxed so that we have apps that our team develops and outside parties, so we don't want it to be able to brick the system or harm it. It comes with an SDK and an emulator that is really good. Pretty much if your game works in the emulator, it will work on the hardware. And we've got a bunch of getting started articles on our tech blog, which is at tech.sifteo.com. So this will have all kinds of stuff from talking about how to use the emulator to talking about just how your main loop should be set up to how to use sprites, all kinds of good stuff. And so in the few minutes I have left, what I want to do is show a few of the games and game prototypes that have been developed, because we've run some game jams at universities and companies, and then we also have recently actually run a contest with Kyle Gabler, who was the creator of World of Goo, and he's got a website, experimentalgameplay.com, and they run contests. So we did a contest with them in January and February and got all these awesome entries. So I wanted to show a couple of the ones we like the most from there. So this is one that we really loved because it was using the platform in a way that was simultaneously not a good use of the platform, but an awesome use of the platform. It's basically it's a 2D platformer where you can turn the neighboring territory all the way around if you want to. First you see a passageway leading off to the right and up, and then you can break it away and turn the cube and put it back, and then all of a sudden walk into it as if you're now walking on the wall or walking on the ceiling. So you really can reorient the world and walk on from the perspective of gravity being in any of the four directions. Maybe better played than described, but that's the idea. And then the next one, this is a storytelling game. It's kind of like Rory's Story Cubes, if you've ever seen that, which basically, it just gives these images that are the seed for which you can create a story around it. Totally open-ended. This is a little girl in Italy telling a story. Somehow, during this contest, they took this thing all around the world and got different people in different places doing it. So you make up your own stories. This one is kind of like Diner Dash.
You put the lettuce on there, and then you tap, and so it chops.
It's called Cube Cafe, and you're basically it's a like time management, or I guess more accurately like a plate spinning kind of game where you have to keep things happening in parallel.
To make a sound. Pretty cool, huh? So you can use the tomatoes and the lettuce to make gourmet burgers, which have lettuce or tomatoes on them. And also during the vegetarian attack level, you can also make vegetarian sandwiches that just have any other vegetables on them. And then similarly, you use that.
So this game is really full and complex. I won't let it run much more than that. This is one that is an action game, multiplayer. And you play a cyclist going through these tunnels, trying to find an umbrella and bring it back to the starting point. So you can see the kind of fast-paced interaction that you can do with the system. This one is like as if Rubik's Cube was designed for Sifteo cubes. I really love puzzle games, so this is one of my favorites. Okay, we're near the end, so a couple more quick videos. This is a game alright, the first one was a game inspired by Bloop for iPad. This is one, that was one made by Daguda Fabri. It's called Tower No Tumble. The one you just saw was Fresh, built by Chris Osborne and company. Chris was one of the BitTrip developers. And then these are some, I think this is footage from an NYU game jam where people built a bunch of game prototypes in a day. Okay, so more than I can show, but we're doing some pretty cool games on the system. From Richard Garfield, who created Magic the Gathering, he's designing a game on our system. Phil Fish, who released Fez last year, his group is making a game. So the cool thing for us is that we're now getting these developers that we've been fans of for a long time to build for Sifteo cubes because it offers these really unique creative possibilities. It's a design landscape that doesn't exist on any other platform. So it's fun for us. So if you're interested to get involved, grab the SDK. It's right at sifteo.com/developers. If you make hardware, I would urge you to think about that glass slab warning that I talked about in the beginning, and make sure that you're building products and devices that really are different and do really different things than what phones and tablets do. Because there's going to be even more phones and tablets in the future. So the kind of devices that really will shine and really offer something of benefit to humans will be the ones that are totally differentiated. And then otherwise, find the experiences and games and systems you think are great and tell people about them. So that's all I have for today. Thanks very much.